People say that trust is the foundation of any marriage, but what happens when trust is nothing but an illusion? I didn't stumble upon my wife's betrayal. It stared back at me from a hidden camera in my own bedroom. The things I saw weren't just acts of infidelity. They were performances meant to humiliate me, destroy me, and, I would later learn, break me in ways I didn't know were possible. This isn't just a story of betrayal, it's a story of how I turned their lies into my ultimate weapon. The day I discovered the truth started like any other. I kissed my wife Veronica goodbye as she left for her weekly yoga class, completely unaware of the storm brewing under the surface. For months, I had noticed the little things: her distracted smiles, the quick glances at her phone, the subtle yet intentional way she avoided my touch. I told myself I was overthinking it. Veronica was beautiful, ambitious, and full of life. Everything I had fallen in love with 10 years ago. But that charm had recently started to feel like a mask. It was our anniversary a few weeks prior that had planted the first seed of doubt. I had planned a romantic getaway, just the two of us, free from work, phones, and obligations. But as I watched her feign excitement, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes, I knew something was wrong. "Work is killing me," she had said, sighing dramatically. "The CEO expects us to be available 24/7. Her excuse was convincing. She worked in high finance after all, a world where late-night calls and last-minute meetings weren't uncommon. But my gut told me there was more to the story. One late night, after another of Veronica's emergency meetings, I decided I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. I purchased a discreet hidden camera, the kind you could hide in plain sight. It felt like a betrayal of my own principles, but I had to know the truth. I installed the camera in our bedroom, telling myself it was to ease my mind. I never expected to see anything more than an empty room. The footage I watched days later shattered my world. It wasn't just a betrayal, it was a spectacle. Veronica and another man, a colleague judging by their whispered conversations, used my bed as their stage. Their laughter, their mockery of me, their whispered plans to use me as a stepping stone for their careers. It was all there, recorded in crisp detail. I sat in the dark, watching hours of footage that turned my stomach. The man was Simon Reed, a rising star in her firm. But what enraged me most wasn't the affair itself, it was the way they talked about me. "He's too trusting," Veronica said, her voice dripping with disdain. "He'll never suspect a thing." Simon laughed. "Perfect. Once the deal is done, we won't need him anymore." Over the next week, I became a man obsessed. Every interaction with Veronica became an act of restraint. Every time I looked at her, I saw Simon's hands on her, his laughter at my expense. I reviewed the footage again and again, piecing together their plans. It wasn't just about the affair. They were scheming to use my connections in the real estate market to secure a multi-million-dollar deal, cutting me out once it was finalized. This wasn't just betrayal, it was war. I knew confronting her outright would accomplish nothing. Veronica was sharp, manipulative, and skilled at playing the victim. If I wanted to take her down, I'd need to play the long game. The first thing I did was secure the evidence. I copied the footage onto multiple devices, keeping backups in places she'd never think to look. Then, I reached out to a private investigator, one who specialized in corporate espionage. "Find everything you can on Simon Reed," I told him. "Dig deep." He nodded, his eyes glinting with intrigue. "Consider it done." In the weeks that followed, I played my part perfectly. I was the loving husband, the clueless partner, the man who trusted his wife implicitly. "Why don't we have a date night?" I suggested one evening, surprising her with flowers. Her smile was genuine, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of guilt. "I'd love that," she said, leaning in for a kiss. I kissed her back, tasting the lies on her lips. The private investigator delivered his report 2 weeks later, and it was worse than I had imagined. Simon wasn't just her lover, he was deeply entangled in a network of shady dealings within the firm. Together, he and Veronica had been funneling insider information to competitors, securing backdoor deals that would line their pockets while leaving others to take the fall. Their plan involved using my connections to close a lucrative real estate deal, then pinning any fallout on me. The audacity of it made my blood boil, but it also gave me clarity. They had underestimated me, and now it was my turn to play the game. The truth wasn't just a knife to the heart, it was a weapon in my hands. Veronica and Simon thought they were clever, but their arrogance would be their undoing. They had underestimated the one thing that would make me dangerous: my patience. I wasn't going to lash out in anger or confront Veronica in a dramatic, cliché showdown. No, that's what she would expect. Instead, I would play their game, carefully, methodically, and take everything from them. I spent days crafting the first steps of my plan. It started with understanding the real estate deal they were orchestrating. Using my contacts, I quietly gathered details about the project, a luxury residential development in the city's most desirable neighborhood. It was a high-stakes, high-reward investment, and Veronica and Simon needed me to finalize it. They thought they were using me, but I was about to turn the tables. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, I feigned exhaustion. "Work's been killing me," I said, running a hand through my hair. "I don't know if I can handle this real estate deal on my own." Veronica perked up, her eyes gleaming with opportunity. "Maybe I can help," she offered, her voice syrupy sweet. I smiled at her, forcing myself to act grateful. "That would be amazing," I said. "I just don't want to screw this up. It's the biggest deal of my career." "Don't worry," she said, placing her hand over mine. "We'll figure it out together." Her words dripped with manipulation, but I didn't flinch. The next phase of the plan involved Simon. I invited him to lunch under the guise of discussing the deal. He was hesitant at first, perhaps wary of being too close to me, but his greed won out. "I've heard great things about you," I said, extending my hand as he arrived. Simon shook it, his smile smug. "Veronica's told me a lot about you too. She says you've got an eye for opportunities." "Oh, she's kind," I said, feigning modesty. "Honestly, I could use someone like you on this project. You seem like the type who knows how to get things done." His ego swelled at the compliment, and by the end of the lunch, he was practically begging to be involved. With both Veronica and Simon now fully engaged, I planted the bait. I accidentally left documents around the house detailing a fake buyer's interest in the real estate deal. The buyer was a shell entity I had created, designed to appear legitimate but ultimately traceable to Simon and Veronica. "Did you see this?" I asked Veronica one night, handing her the papers. Her eyes lit up as she scanned them. "This buyer could close the deal within weeks," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "Exactly," I said. "If we play our cards right, we could all come out on top." She nodded, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Behind the scenes, my private investigator, James, worked tirelessly to document every move Simon and Veronica made. He intercepted their emails, recorded their meetings, and tracked their financial transactions. "They're getting sloppy," James said during one of our updates. "Simon's already funneled money into the shell account you set up. He thinks he's untouchable." "Good," I said, my voice cold. "Let them think that." As the weeks went on, I turned up the charm with Veronica. I bought her gifts, planned romantic dinners, and showered her with affection. Every time she looked at me with guilt in her eyes, I felt a surge of satisfaction. "Are you okay?" she asked one evening, her voice soft. "Better than ever," I said with a smile, leaning in to kiss her. She didn't realize that my kindness wasn't forgiveness, it was strategy. The real estate deal began to pick up speed, and Simon grew bolder. He started making promises to third parties, offering them a cut of the profits. James tracked these promises, building a web of evidence that painted Simon as the mastermind behind a fraudulent scheme. "He's digging his own grave," James said, sliding a folder across the table. "We've got enough to bury him." "And Veronica?" I asked. James smirked. "Oh, she's neck deep in this. She signed off on the transactions. There's no way she can claim innocence." With the trap set, I initiated the final phase. I contacted a journalist I trusted, someone with a reputation for exposing corruption in high-profile cases. "I have a story for you," I said over the phone, "but it has to be airtight." The journalist agreed, and I handed over the evidence, ensuring every detail was verified. A week later, the story broke. The headline was damning. "Real estate scandal exposes fraudulent dealings by prominent executives." The article detailed Simon and Veronica's scheme, complete with financial records, emails, and witness testimonies. It painted them as greedy opportunists willing to exploit anyone for their gain. Within hours, their reputations were in ruins. Veronica's firm launched an internal investigation, and Simon's business partners cut ties. When Veronica came home that night, her face was a mask of panic. "Did you see the news?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I did," I said calmly, sipping my drink. She froze, her eyes narrowing. "You knew about this, didn't you?" I stood up, walking toward her slowly. "Oh, Veronica," I said, my voice dripping with mock sympathy. "You didn't think you could outsmart me, did you?" Her face crumpled as the realization hit her. You set this up." "Every step," I said. "You wanted to destroy me, but you forgot one thing. I always play the long game." When the story broke, Veronica's once perfect world shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. She had spent years building her reputation as a sharp, savvy professional, someone who could navigate the treacherous waters of high finance with ease. But now, all anyone saw was a fraud, a woman implicated in a scheme so messy and public that even her most loyal allies began to distance themselves. The fallout wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal. And as I watched her unravel piece by piece, I felt no pity. She had made her choices, and now she was drowning in them. It didn't take long for Simon to show his true colors. Within hours of the article's publication, he was already spinning his own narrative, portraying himself as an unwitting victim of Veronica's ambition. "She set the whole thing up," he told the press. "I was just following orders. Veronica Lee is the real mastermind behind this." The audacity of his lies was almost impressive. Simon, ever the opportunist, had no intention of going down for the crimes he'd committed. If throwing Veronica under the bus meant saving his own skin, he'd do it without hesitation. The media frenzy was relentless. Every news outlet ran with the story, dissecting every detail of the scheme and speculating on how two supposedly brilliant professionals had spiraled into such blatant corruption. Social media was even worse. Memes, hashtags, and damning commentary spread like wildfire. Veronica's name was synonymous with greed and deceit, and Simon wasn't faring much better. But the part that hit Veronica hardest wasn't the professional backlash, it was the way Simon abandoned her. For months, they had whispered promises of a future together, of a life built on their shared ambitions. And now, in her darkest hour, he was nowhere to be found. I found Veronica sitting in the living room late one night, the glow of her phone illuminating her tear-streaked face. She was scrolling through article after article, her fingers trembling as she read the vitriol directed at her. "They hate me," she whispered, not realizing I was standing in the doorway. I stepped closer, my expression cold. "What did you expect?" I asked. "You thought you could betray me, steal from me, and humiliate me without consequences." She looked up, her eyes wide with desperation. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice breaking. "But Simon's lying. He's pinning everything on me." I let out a bitter laugh. "Of course he is. You think a man like that has loyalty? You're as much a fool as you thought I was." For the first time in years, Veronica looked small, vulnerable, and utterly broken. She reached for my hand, her voice trembling. "Please, Alexander, I need your help. We can fix this together." I pulled my hand away, my anger surging. "Fix this," I said, my voice rising. "You ruined everything, Veronica. You and Simon plotted against me, used me, and now you want my help?" Tears streamed down her face. "I wasn't thinking," she said. "I got caught up in something bigger than me, but I never stopped loving you." Her words were a slap in the face. "Don't you dare use love as an excuse," I said. "If you ever loved me, you wouldn't have done this." 2 days later, Simon was arrested on charges of fraud and embezzlement. Thanks to the evidence I had provided to the authorities, his role in the scheme was undeniable. The news sent shockwaves through Veronica's firm. They launched an internal investigation, and it wasn't long before Veronica found herself implicated as well. Her accounts were frozen, her position suspended, and her colleagues avoided her like she was contagious. She was now facing the very real possibility of criminal charges. In a desperate attempt to save herself, Veronica reached out to Simon. She left voicemail after voicemail, pleading with him to come clean and share the blame. But Simon, true to form, ignored her completely. Instead, he made a deal with the authorities, providing them with information about Veronica in exchange for a reduced sentence. When Veronica found out, her fury was palpable. She smashed her phone against the wall, screaming in frustration. "Did you think he wouldn't turn on you?" I asked from the doorway, watching her rage with cold detachment. "I thought he cared about me," she spat, her voice filled with venom. I shook my head. "You thought he was like you, willing to betray anyone to get what he wanted, and you were right." Veronica's world had collapsed, and she was left with nothing. No career, no lover, and no allies. The life she had meticulously crafted was now in ruins, and the only person left in her corner was me, the man she had betrayed. But I wasn't there to save her. "You wanted to play the game," I said, my voice calm but firm. "And now you've lost. Maybe next time you'll think twice before underestimating me." She stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and regret. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said quietly. "But you don't understand. This isn't over." Veronica's words didn't rattle me. If anything, they solidified my resolve. She had burned every bridge, and now she was lashing out, desperate to regain control. But I had taken everything she valued, her reputation, her power, her lover, and I wasn't done yet. Veronica was a woman cornered, and cornered people are the most dangerous of all. In the weeks following Simon's arrest and her suspension, she retreated into herself. The vibrant, confident woman I had once loved was gone, replaced by someone hollowed out by betrayal and failure. But her quiet wasn't surrender. It was the calm before the storm. I knew Veronica too well to think she'd let this end without one last desperate move. One evening, while reviewing the final stages of the fallout, I got a call from James, my private investigator. His voice was tense. "We've got a problem," he said. "What kind of problem?" I asked, already bracing myself. "Veronica's been meeting with someone, an old name in Simon's network, Julian Kane." The name sent a chill down my spine. Julian Kane wasn't just a shady businessman, he was a known enforcer in Simon's circle, the kind of man you called when you needed to clean up a mess, by any means necessary. "She's looking for leverage," James continued, "and if she's gone to Julian, it's not going to be legal." I clenched my fists. "Keep watching her. Let me know the moment you find something concrete." Veronica's desperation had taken her to Julian, and Julian, ever the opportunist, had a plan. He promised her a way to rebuild her reputation, a way to turn the tables on Simon and, by extension, me. All it would take was one bold, reckless move. The plan, as I later discovered, was as audacious as it was dangerous. Julian would fabricate evidence implicating Simon in a broader conspiracy, framing him as the sole architect of their schemes. But to make it convincing, Veronica would need to provide something real, something damning, and that something was me. Through James's surveillance, I uncovered Veronica's new plan. She intended to frame me as a willing accomplice in Simon's crimes. She had gathered old contracts, financial records, and fabricated emails, all designed to paint me as the mastermind pulling Simon's strings. Her logic was clear. If she could destroy me, she could rebuild herself. When James handed me the evidence of her scheme, I felt a flicker of something unexpected: admiration. Even in ruin, Veronica was playing the game with the same ruthless precision that had once made me fall in love with her. But admiration didn't mean forgiveness. I decided it was time to confront Veronica directly. I waited until she was alone, sitting in the study surrounded by papers and a glass of wine. Her once pristine office was now a chaotic mess, reflecting the state of her life. "Working late?" I asked, stepping into the room. She jumped, startled by my presence. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice defensive. I held up the file James had compiled, dropping it onto her desk. "Funny," I said. "I could ask you the same thing. Planning to destroy me, Veronica? Again?" Her face went pale as she flipped through the file, realizing the extent of what I knew. "It's not what it looks like," she stammered. "Spare me the lies," I said coldly. "I know everything. Julian Kane, the fake evidence, the plan to pin this all on me. You think I don't see through you?" She stood, her desperation bubbling to the surface. "I didn't have a choice," she said, her voice breaking. "You ruined me, Alexander. You took everything from me. What was I supposed to do, roll over and let you win?" "You were supposed to own your mistakes," I said, my voice hard. "But instead, you doubled down, and now you've made your last mistake." What Veronica didn't know was that I had already outmaneuvered her. Through James, I had intercepted her communications with Julian and provided them to the authorities. Julian was now under investigation, and the fabricated evidence Veronica had gathered was useless. But I wasn't done. I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions, to understand the depth of her betrayal. "You thought you were smarter than me," I said, stepping closer, "but you never were. You're just a desperate woman, grasping at straws." Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. That night, Veronica reached her breaking point. As she sat alone in the study, surrounded by the wreckage of her life, she poured herself another glass of wine and stared at the phone in her hand. She could call Julian, beg him to help her salvage what was left. Or she could call me, try to repair the damage she had done. Instead, she called Simon. In a move I hadn't anticipated, Veronica and Simon reconnected. United by their shared hatred for me and their mutual desperation, they decided to work together. Their plan was simple. If they couldn't destroy me individually, they would do it together. When Veronica and Simon joined forces, the stakes escalated dramatically. Individually, they had been desperate and dangerous, but together they became reckless. Their hatred for me fueled a partnership built on fragile trust and mutual spite, a volatile combination that was bound to implode. What they didn't know was that every step they took, every move they planned, was being fed back to me. James, my ever-reliable investigator, had infiltrated Simon's circle, ensuring I stayed one step ahead. "This alliance of theirs won't last," James said during one of our late-night meetings. "They're both too self-serving. Give it time and they'll destroy each other." I nodded, but I couldn't afford to wait passively. I needed to light the match that would set their fragile partnership ablaze. Through James, I planted a seed of doubt between Veronica and Simon. A forged email from Simon to Julian Kane suggested that Simon was planning to use Veronica as a scapegoat, just as he had done before. The email found its way to Veronica's inbox late one night. The subject line was simple but effective. "The final move." When Veronica opened it, her fury was instant. The email detailed Simon's supposed plan to cut ties with her and leave her to face the consequences of their latest schemes. She didn't confront him right away. Instead, she stewed in her anger, her paranoia growing with each passing day. Simon, meanwhile, was oblivious to the email but began sensing Veronica's coldness. He noticed her guarded demeanor, the way her once calculated decisions now seemed driven by emotion. "She's acting off," Simon confided to Julian in a conversation James recorded. "I think she's planning something behind my back." Julian laughed darkly. "She probably is. That's what happens when you partner with someone like her." The cracks in their alliance widened, and I watched from the shadows, satisfied that my plan was working. Eventually, the tension between Veronica and Simon came to a head. They arranged a private meeting in a luxury hotel suite to discuss their next steps. James and I set up surveillance in the suite beforehand, ensuring we captured every word. When Veronica arrived, her demeanor was icy. "We need to talk," she said, dropping her purse onto the table. Simon poured himself a drink, his expression casual. "About what?" "About this," she said, pulling out a printout of the forged email. Simon's face darkened as he read it. "Where did you get this?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped. "You've been planning to cut me out from the start, just like you always do." Simon's eyes narrowed. "I don't know where you got this, but it's not real. Someone's trying to turn us against each other." "Why should I believe you?" Veronica demanded. "You've betrayed everyone you've ever worked with." "And you haven't," Simon shot back, his voice rising. "You're the one who came crawling back to me when your life fell apart. Don't act like you're any better." Their argument escalated quickly, with accusations flying back and forth. Every grievance, every betrayal, every ounce of mistrust between them came spilling out. "You used me," Veronica shouted. "You let me take the fall while you walked away unscathed." "And you're a hypocrite," Simon countered. "You're the one who dragged Alexander into this. You're the one who turned his life upside down." The tension reached a breaking point when Veronica, in a moment of blind rage, threw her glass at Simon. It shattered against the wall, the sound echoing through the suite. "You're pathetic," she spat, "and I'm done with you." Simon, realizing their alliance was over, made a panicked call to Julian Kane. "It's falling apart," he said, his voice frantic. "Veronica's turning on me. We need to act now." Julian's response was cold and calculated. "You're on your own, Simon. I don't clean up messes for free." As Simon's last lifeline slipped away, he made one final desperate move. He leaked false information to the press, framing Veronica as the sole mastermind behind their schemes. The next morning, headlines screamed Veronica's name, painting her as the villain in a new wave of scandals. Simon's fingerprints were all over the leaks, and Veronica knew it. Fueled by rage and a need for revenge, she decided to retaliate in the most dramatic way possible. Veronica had reached the breaking point. Simon's betrayal was the last straw, and she no longer cared about consequences. Her desperation turned into recklessness, and her anger became her driving force. I knew her well enough to predict her next move. Veronica wasn't going to fade into the background. She was going to go out swinging, and she would make sure Simon felt the full weight of her wrath. But what neither of them realized was that I had been orchestrating their collapse from the very beginning. Late one evening, Veronica showed up at Simon's penthouse, unannounced and uninvited. She had discarded her usual polished demeanor, her makeup smudged and her hair disheveled. She looked like a woman on the edge. Simon opened the door, startled to see her. "What the hell are you doing here?" he asked, his tone sharp. "You think you can get away with this?" Veronica said, her voice trembling with fury. "You think you can destroy me and walk away unscathed?" Simon sighed, rubbing his temples. "You're making a scene. Just leave, Veronica. It's over." "It's not over," she spat, stepping closer. "Not until you pay for what you've done." Their argument quickly escalated, with both of them hurling insults and accusations. Veronica accused Simon of using her, manipulating her, and then discarding her the moment she became inconvenient. Simon, in turn, called her a liability, a mistake he regretted ever getting involved with. As their shouting match reached its peak, Veronica pulled out her trump card, a USB drive containing evidence she had secretly gathered against Simon. "This," she said, holding it up, "is everything the authorities need to bury you. You're finished." Simon's face darkened. "You wouldn't dare," he said, stepping toward her. "Try me," she said, her voice cold. What neither of them knew was that I had anticipated this confrontation. Through James's surveillance, I had monitored their movements and ensured the USB drive Veronica held wasn't just evidence against Simon, it was part of my final trap. The files on the drive, though incriminating, were also laced with information implicating Veronica in even deeper financial crimes. It was a perfect storm. Simon and Veronica, each desperate to destroy the other, would end up sealing their own fates. As their confrontation turned physical, with Simon grabbing for the USB drive and Veronica resisting, chaos erupted. In the struggle, the drive was thrown to the floor, its contents already uploaded to a secure server I controlled. "You've ruined everything!" Veronica screamed, her voice breaking. "I trusted you." "And that was your first mistake," Simon snarled. The scene ended with both of them storming out, unaware that their every word and action had been recorded, adding to the growing mountain of evidence against them. The next morning, I leaked the final pieces of evidence to the media. This time, the story wasn't just about Simon or Veronica. It was about both of them, their alliance, their betrayals, and their downfall. Headlines screamed their names, accompanied by leaked audio recordings, emails, and financial transactions. The media frenzy was immediate, and public opinion turned vicious. Simon and Veronica became pariahs, their reputations destroyed beyond repair. The authorities launched investigations into both of them, and arrest warrants were issued within days. When Veronica was taken into custody, I visited her one final time. She sat in the sterile interrogation room, her hands cuffed and her expression hollow. "You," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you did this to me." I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "No, Veronica, you did this to yourself. I just made sure the world saw you for who you really are." She stared at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and despair. "Was it worth it?" she asked. I stood adjusting my jacket. "Every second." Simon, meanwhile, had fled the city in a desperate attempt to avoid arrest. But with his face plastered across every news outlet, it didn't take long for authorities to track him down. He was apprehended at a small airport, attempting to board a private jet. His arrest marked the end of the saga, but for me, it was just another step in reclaiming my life. With Veronica and Simon out of the picture, I finally felt free. My business was intact, my reputation restored, and my enemies destroyed. But this wasn't just about revenge, it was about survival. In their attempt to ruin me, they had underestimated my resolve, my patience, and my ability to outmaneuver them at every turn. As I sat in my office one evening, reflecting on everything that had transpired, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was from James. "New intel on Julian Kane. Call me ASAP." My heart sank as I opened the attachment. Inside was a photo of Julian meeting with someone I didn't recognize, a man with sharp features and a cold smile. Beneath the photo was a note, "The game isn't over." I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. If they wanted to keep playing, I was ready. The photo James sent felt like a prelude to another war. Julian Kane, the enforcer who had loomed on the edges of this saga, had found a new partner, a man whose presence in the criminal underworld was both elusive and legendary. I didn't recognize the man at first, but James filled in the blanks during our call. His name is Adrian March, he said. He's not just a fixer, he's a strategist, the kind of man who doesn't just retaliate but obliterates anyone in his way. What's his angle? I asked, leaning forward in my chair. James hesitated before answering. He's tied to Julian, and Julian has one reason to care about this mess, you. Whatever deal they've struck, it's personal. The realization hit me like a thunderclap. I wasn't just cleaning up the remnants of Veronica and Simon's destruction. I was now the target of a new, more calculated threat. Over the next few days, James and I worked to uncover Adrian's strategy. His movements were difficult to track. No digital footprint, no obvious connections. But James's network began to piece together a trail. We discovered that Adrian had been buying out key players in Simon and Veronica's former network. Lawyers, accountants, even people in the media, all were suddenly aligning with Adrian's interests. He's consolidating power, James said. If he gets enough leverage, he could control the narrative, the investigations, everything. I nodded, my mind racing. Then we hit him before he finishes building. Before I could make my move, Adrian came to me. It was a bold, audacious gesture. I was working late in my office when he arrived, unannounced, escorted by my assistant, who looked pale and nervous. "Mr. March," I said, standing as he entered. He extended a hand, his smile sharp. "Mr. Lee, it's a pleasure to finally meet." I shook his hand cautiously, noting the strength in his grip. "You've been busy," I said, gesturing for him to sit. Adrian chuckled, settling into the chair across from me. "As have you. I must say your dismantling of Simon and Veronica was impressive." I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression neutral. "What do you want, March?" His smile widened. "I want to offer you a deal. You and I working together, with your resources and my expertise, we could build something extraordinary." "And if I refuse?" I asked. Adrian's gaze hardened. "Then you become my next project." Adrian's offer lingered in my mind long after he left. Partnering with him would mean stepping into a world of power, corruption, and influence far beyond anything I had dealt with before. But refusing him would undoubtedly make me his target. "Do you trust him?" James asked when I told him about the meeting. "Of course not," I said. "But this isn't about trust. It's about control. If I say no, I lose the chance to see what he's really planning. If I say yes, I keep him close and vulnerable." James nodded slowly. "It's a risk." "Everything worth doing is," I said. I accepted Adrian's offer, but with conditions. We would enter a trial partnership, pooling resources for a single project, a high-profile investment in the tech sector. The project would serve as a test, both for Adrian's capabilities and his loyalty. "I knew you'd see the value in this," Adrian said when we signed the agreement. "Together, we'll be unstoppable." But even as I smiled and shook his hand, I was already planning my next move. Behind the scenes, I worked with James to infiltrate Adrian's network. We embedded a mole within his organization, someone who could feed us information about his true intentions. "He's careful," James warned. "It'll take time to get anything substantial." "We don't need everything," I said, "just enough to turn the tide when the time comes." As our partnership progressed, Adrian's true nature began to emerge. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly without conscience. He manipulated our shared project to his advantage, siphoning funds and undercutting my authority. It was a calculated move, one designed to test my reaction. But instead of confronting him, I played along. I let him think he was winning, even as James and I gathered evidence of his betrayals. When the time was right, I struck. Using the evidence James had collected, I exposed Adrian's schemes to our investors, the media, and his own network. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Adrian's reputation, carefully cultivated over years, crumbled in a matter of days. His allies abandoned him, his finances were frozen, and his influence evaporated. He came to me, furious and desperate. "You set me up," he said, slamming his fist on my desk. I leaned forward, meeting his glare. "You underestimated me, just like everyone else." As Adrian was escorted out of my office by security, I felt a rare sense of closure. I had outmaneuvered him, just as I had Simon and Veronica. But later that night, as I reviewed the final details of Adrian's downfall, an email appeared in my inbox. It was from an anonymous sender with a single line of text. "You're not the only one who knows how to play the game." Attached was a file, a dossier on me, my secrets, my moves, my vulnerabilities. I stared at the screen, the realization sinking in. The game wasn't over. It never would be.